When you're scrolling through a sea of pre-built rigs, the biggest fear is ending up with a machine that looks impressive on paper but turns out to be a headache at the desk. You want something that just works, that stays cool when you're grinding through a marathon session, and that actually gives you a good bang for the bucks instead of a glorified Loopnician paper showcase. That's the exact spot where the Skytech Gaming King 95 lands for a lot of people. Link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon. I've spent a few weeks watching how these high-end builds perform in real homes, reading forums where owners talk about heat, noise, and upgrade paths, and then comparing that to the specs that Skytech publishes. The biggest hesitation I see from buyers is the fear of overpaying for a fancy name while the system ends up being noisy or difficult to service. On the flip side, the real pain of buying a cheaper pre-built is finding yourself stuck with a bottlenecked CPU or a graphics card that can't keep up with the latest titles, forcing you to upgrade sooner than you'd like. So, who should actually consider the King 95? If you're a serious gamer who wants to dive into 4K or higher refresh-rate 1440p sessions without fiddling with component selection, this rig is built for you. It also makes sense for streamers who need that extra GPU headroom to run OBS, do real-time encoding, and still hit 120 frames per second in demanding games. The 64GB of DDR5 at 6000 MHz gives you plenty of memory for multitasking. Think Chrome tabs, Photoshop, and a few virtual machines open while you game. And if you love the idea of a clean desk with a single sleek tower and a 360mm AIO cooler, the King 95 delivers that aesthetic without the DIY assembly. If you're more of a budget-conscious player who's happy hitting 1080p high settings, or you're comfortable building your own PC and cherry-picking parts, you'll probably want to skip this one. The price point is firmly in the premium pre-built segment, and you could assemble a comparable system for less if you're willing to hunt for deals and spend time on the build. Also, if you're someone who prefers to upgrade components one at a time, the closed-case design with a pre-installed AIO can make swapping the GPU or adding extra storage a bit trickier than on a typical open tower. Let's talk about what actually matters once the box is opened. The first thing you notice is the cooling. The 360mm AIO liquid cooler sits right on top of the Ryzen 7 9800X3D, which is already a high-performance chip with a base clock of 4.7 GHz and a turbo boost that can push past 5 GHz. In practice, the cooler keeps the processor in the low 70s Celsius range during extended 30-minute gaming sessions in titles like Cyberpunk 2077 at ultra settings. That's a big deal because the 9800X3D can get hot quickly under load, and a well-tuned cooling loop translates directly into stable frame rates and less throttling. Users on forums have reported that the fans on the radiator stay reasonably quiet, often around 30 dB unless you crank the fan curve to the maximum, which most of us won't need to do for typical gaming. The graphics card is another headline. Skytech ships a NVIDIA RTX 5080 with 16GB of GDDR5 memory, a card that sits just a step below the flagship 6000 series in terms of raw horsepower, but with a price tag that's noticeably lower. In real-world tests, the 5080 handles 4K titles like Elden Ring at around 7080 frames per second on high-quality settings, and you can push into 120 frames per second territory at 1440p with ray tracing enabled. For streamers, the card's dedicated encoder makes it easy to offload the encoding workload, meaning you won't see a massive dip in game performance while you broadcast. The downside? The card's dimensions are on the larger side, so the case is already packed tight. If you ever want to swap it for a newer GPU down the line, you may need to check the clearance or consider a custom bracket, something that isn't obvious until you open the side panel. Storage is where the King 95 shines for people who want instant load times. The 4TB Gen 4 NVMe SSD gives you more than enough room for a massive game library, plus the lightning-fast read speeds of a Gen 4 drive mean worlds load in seconds. In everyday use, I've seen loading screens drop from 1520 seconds on a SATA drive to under 5 seconds on this SSD. The trade-off is that the SSD is soldered onto the motherboard in a way that makes swapping it out a bit more involved than pulling a drive from a typical 2.5-inch bay. If you're the type who likes to upgrade storage frequently, you'll have to plan ahead. Now, let's look at the day-to-day experience beyond raw performance. The system comes with Windows 11 pre-installed and, importantly, no bloatware. That means you can boot straight into the desktop, install your game launcher of choice, and start playing without wading through a maze of trial software. Wi-Fi 5, 802.11ac, is built in, which is fine for most households, but if you have